The sound of Martha's shrill voice pierced through the thin walls of our temporary bedroom, grating on my last nerve. I gripped the edge of the vanity, willing myself to take deep breaths. This was supposed to be a short-term arrangement, but it felt like an eternity. "Naomi, are you decent? I need to talk to you about dinner tonight." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before responding. "Just a minute, Martha." I smoothed down my blouse and opened the door, plastering on a smile. "What can I help you with?" Martha's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "You're not wearing that to dinner, are you?" "It's so plain." I bit back a retort. "I have a video call with my publisher in an hour. This is work attire." "Work, work, work," Martha clucked her tongue. "When are you going to focus on starting a family? You're not getting any younger, you know." The familiar ache in my chest flared up, but I pushed it down. "Jake and I will start a family when we're ready," I said, my tone clipped. Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Well, don't wait too long. Now, about dinner. I was thinking we could have pot roast, but Richard insists on grilling steaks. What do you think?" "Whatever you decide is fine," I said, eager to end the conversation. "You could at least pretend to care," Martha huffed. "This is your home now, too." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. This wasn't my home. It was a temporary living situation that was quickly becoming unbearable. Just then, Jake appeared in the hallway. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes darting between Martha and me. "Oh, Jake," Martha's face lit up. "Tell your wife she needs to be more involved in family decisions. After all, you two will be living here for quite some time." Jake's expression faltered for a moment before he recovered. "Mom, Naomi's got a lot on her plate with work. Why don't you and Dad decide on dinner?" Martha's lips pursed, but she nodded. "Fine. We'll discuss this later." She turned and headed downstairs. As soon as she was out of earshot, I rounded on Jake. What did she mean? Living here for quite some time? I thought this was temporary. Jake ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. "Well, about that, the job transfer is taking longer than expected. We might need to stay here for a few more months." The room spun around me. "Months? Jake, I can't do this for months." "I know it's not ideal," Jake said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "But it's free rent, and we're saving money, plus Mom and Dad love having us here." "They love having you here," I corrected. "Your mother can barely tolerate me." Jake sighed. "You're exaggerating. Look, I've got to head to the office. We'll talk more tonight, okay?" Before I could protest, he was gone, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. Months. How was I supposed to survive months of Martha's constant judgment and Richard's belittling comments? I retreated to our room, closing the door and leaning against it. The secret I'd been carrying for years felt heavier than ever. If they knew the truth, that I couldn't have children, would it make things better or worse? My phone buzzed with a reminder about the video call. I took a deep breath, pushing my personal turmoil aside. I had work to do, a career I'd fought hard for. I wouldn't let Martha or this situation derail that. As I set up my laptop, I heard Richard's booming voice from downstairs. "Jake gone already? That boy needs to learn to relax. And that wife of his? When is she going to start contributing to this household?" I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned when Jake and I got married. Something had to change, and soon. But for now, I had to focus on work. It was the only thing keeping me sane in this house of judgment and secrets. Little did I know, the real storm was yet to come. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Martha rummaging through my closet. I bolted upright, heart racing. "What are you doing?" Martha turned, holding up one of my blouses with disdain. "Just seeing if you have anything suitable for the charity luncheon this afternoon." "Really, Naomi, don't you own anything with color?" I snatched the blouse from her hands. "I wasn't aware of any luncheon, and I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my privacy." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Privacy? You're living in our house, dear. And as for the luncheon, I told Jake to inform you. It's important for our family's image." I bit back a retort. Of course, Jake hadn't mentioned it. He'd been increasingly distant lately, always at work or out with colleagues. "I'm sorry, Martha, but I have a deadline today. I can't attend." Her face clouded with disappointment and anger. "You never make an effort, do you? No wonder Jake's been so stressed lately." Before I could respond, she stormed out, leaving me seething. I grabbed my laptop and headed downstairs, desperate for some coffee and solitude. But Richard was already in the kitchen, eyeing me over his newspaper. Late start today? Must be nice to have such a flexible schedule. I ignored him, focusing on making my coffee. As I reached for a mug, Richard cleared his throat. You know, Naomi, when Martha and I were your age, we already had Jake and were well established in our careers. Don't you think it's time you and Jake got serious about your future? The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed everywhere, including on Richard's shoes. For God's sake, he bellowed. Can't you do anything right? Something inside me snapped. Enough, I shouted, surprising even myself. I've had it with your constant criticism and lack of respect. I am a successful editor. I contribute to this household, and my personal choices are none of your business. Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? Jake will hear about this. Good, I retorted. Maybe he'll finally stand up for me instead of letting you two walk all over us. I stormed out, leaving the mess behind. My hands shook as I dialed Jake's number. It went straight to voicemail. Again. Frustrated, I sent a text. We need to talk. Your parents have crossed a line. Hours passed with no response. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the tension simmering in the house. As evening approached, I heard the front door open and Jake's voice mingling with his parents. I steeled myself and went downstairs. The conversation stopped abruptly as I entered the room. Nice of you to join us, Martha said coldly. We were just discussing your behavior today. Jake looked uncomfortable. Naomi, what happened? Dad says you yelled at him? I couldn't believe it. That's what you're concerned about. Not the fact that your mother invaded our privacy or that they both constantly belittle me. Jake ran a hand through his hair. Look, I know it's been tough, but they're just trying to help. Maybe if you made more of an effort. Made more of an effort? I interrupted, my voice rising. I've been bending over backward trying to fit into this family, but nothing I do is ever good enough. Martha gasped dramatically. After all we've done for you two. Jake, are you going to let her speak to us like this? I turned to Jake, silently pleading with him to take my side. But he just looked away, muttering, Maybe we should all calm down and discuss this rationally. In that moment, I saw my marriage for what it truly was, a sham. Jake would never stand up to his parents, never prioritize our relationship over their demands. There's nothing to discuss, I said quietly. I'm going for a walk. Don't wait up. As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard Richard mutter, Good riddance. Jake called after me, Naomi, wait. But I was already gone, stepping into the cool night air, my mind reeling. For the first time since we'd moved in with Jake's parents, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Something had to change, and soon. I just didn't realize how drastic that change would be. I returned from my walk late that night, exhausted but no closer to a solution. The house was quiet, everyone presumably asleep. As I crept up the stairs, I noticed a faint light coming from Jake's study. Curious, I approached the door, left slightly ajar. Jake's voice drifted out, low and intimate. I know, Claire. I'm trying to figure it out. My heart stopped. Claire? Who was Claire? It's complicated, Jake continued. Naomi's been on edge lately, and my parents, well, you know how they are. I leaned closer, barely breathing. Soon, I promise. We'll be together soon. I love you too. The world tilted on its axis. Jake, my Jake, was having an affair. The pieces fell into place. His late nights, his distraction, his reluctance to stand up to his parents. It all made sense now. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? Just then the study door swung open. Jake stood there, phone still in hand, his face a mask of shock and guilt. Naomi, he stammered, I can explain. I held up a hand, silencing him. Don't bother, I heard enough. Jake reached for me, but I jerked away. Please, let's talk about this. Talk? I laughed bitterly. Like you talked to Claire just now? No, Jake, we're done talking. I turned and fled down the stairs, ignoring Jake's calls. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. As I reached for the front door, Martha appeared in her robe. Naomi? What's going on? I whirled on her. Did you know about Jake and Claire? Martha's face paled, confirming my suspicions. Oh, honey, she said, reaching for me. We were going to tell you, but... But what? I spat. You were too busy criticizing me? Too focused on getting your precious grandchildren? Martha flinched. That's not fair. We only want what's best for Jake. And what about me? I shouted, no longer caring who heard. Did you ever consider what was best for me? Richard appeared behind Martha, his face thunderous. Now see here, young lady. But I was beyond caring. No, you see here, I've put up with your judgment, your criticism, your constant belittling, and all this time you've been covering for Jake's affair? Jake came down the stairs, his face ashen. Naomi, please, let's discuss this privately. I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Privately? Like how you've been privately planning a life with Claire? No, Jake, we're done with secrets. I turned to Martha and Richard. You want to know why we don't have children? Because I can't have them. That's right, your precious son married a barren woman. How's that for your perfect family image? The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Richard stood slack-jawed, and Jake looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Naomi, he whispered, why didn't you tell me? I met his gaze, my voice cold. Would it have mattered? Would it have stopped you from falling into Claire's arms? Jake had no answer. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. That's what I thought. I turned to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I'll be back for my things tomorrow. Don't try to stop me. As I stepped out into the night for the second time, I heard Martha's wail and Richard's angry shouts. But I didn't look back. My world had shattered, but from the ruins I would build something new. Something that was truly mine. I pulled out my phone and dialed my best friend's number. Sarah, it's me. I need a place to stay, and I need a good divorce lawyer. As I walked away from the house that had never been my home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I was free. I spent the night at Sarah's, tossing and turning as my mind raced. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I had to face Jake, to end this charade once and for all. Sarah squeezed my hand as I left. You've got this, Naomi. Remember, you deserve better. I nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. When I arrived at Jake's parents' house, Martha opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed. Naomi, please, she began, but I brushed past her. Jake was in the living room, looking as if he hadn't slept either. Naomi, he said, rising. I'm so glad you came back. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I replied coldly. But first, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me everything about Claire. Jake flinched but held my gaze. Claire and we've been seeing each other for 6 months. It started as a friendship, but you fell in love, I finished for him. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. He nodded miserably. I never meant to hurt you, Naomi. I felt trapped. The pressure from my parents, your focus on your career, I know it's no excuse, but you're right, I cut him off. It's no excuse. Do you have any idea what I've been going through? The constant criticism, the loneliness, the guilt about not being able to give you children. Jake's eyes widened. About that. Why didn't you tell me? I laughed bitterly. When, Jake? When you were too busy with work, or when you were sneaking around with Claire. Martha and Richard hovered in the doorway, their faces a mixture of shame and indignation. We had no idea, Martha said softly. If we'd known. You'd what? I snapped. Treat me with basic human decency? I shouldn't have had to earn that. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed. Now see here, young lady. No, you see here, I interrupted, my voice rising. I've put up with your judgment and your son's betrayal for far too long. I want a divorce, Jake. The room fell silent. Jake's face crumpled, but to my surprise, he nodded. If that's what you want, I won't fight you on it. His easy acquiescence was like a knife to my heart. After everything, he wouldn't even fight for our marriage. That's it? I asked, my voice breaking. You're just going to let me go? Jake spread his hands helplessly. What do you want me to say, Naomi? We've been unhappy for a long time. Maybe this is for the best. I felt something inside me shatter, the last remnants of hope, perhaps, or maybe it was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. Fine, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'll have my lawyer contact you. I want you out of our apartment by the end of the week. Jake's head snapped up. What? But where am I supposed to go? I gestured around the room. You seem quite comfortable here with Mommy and Daddy. I'm sure they'll be happy to have you. Martha stepped forward, her face pale. Naomi, please, can't we discuss this? I turned to her, my eyes blazing. There's nothing to discuss. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. As I headed for the door, Jake called out, "Naomi, wait. What about everything we've built together?" I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "You mean the life you were planning with Claire? Or the clothing line we were developing?" Jake's face paled. "The clothing line? Naomi, you wouldn't what?" I asked, a dangerous edge to my voice. "Wouldn't fight for what's rightfully mine. You'd be surprised what I'm capable of, Jake." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, anger, but also a sense of liberation. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "Hello, is this Claire? We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street in an hour. Trust me, you'll want to hear what I have to say." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Jake watching from the window. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. I sat at the coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug, waiting for Claire. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, all the anger and hurt I wanted to unleash. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She was younger than I'd imagined, probably in her late 20s, with long blonde hair and a hesitant smile. "Naomi?" she asked, approaching my table. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I assume you know who I am?" Claire nodded, her face pale. "Jake's wife. I'm so sorry." I held up a hand. "Save it. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for the truth." Over the next hour, Claire spilled everything. How she'd met Jake at a work conference, how he'd pursued her relentlessly, spinning tales of an unhappy marriage and a wife who didn't understand him. "He told me you two were separated," Claire said, tears in her eyes. "That you were only staying together for appearances. I swear, if I'd known—" I laughed bitterly. "Oh, we were separated, all right, by his lies and his cowardice." As Claire continued to talk, a plan began to form in my mind. Jake had lied to both of us, manipulated us for his own gain. It was time he faced the consequences. "Claire," I interrupted her rambling apologies, "I have a proposition for you." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward. "Jake's been playing us both. What do you say we turn the tables on him?" By the time I left the coffee shop, Claire and I had hatched a plan that would make Jake's head spin. But first, I had one more stop to make. I drove back to Jake's parents' house, my resolve strengthening with each mile. When Martha opened the door, her face fell. "Naomi, please, can we talk about this?" she pleaded. I brushed past her, marching into the living room where Richard sat in his armchair. "Where's Jake?" I demanded. "He's not here," Richard growled. "And after the way you spoke to us yesterday—" "Shut up," I snapped, surprising even myself with my vehemence. "You two have done nothing but criticize and belittle me from the day I married your son. Well, now you're going to listen." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to reveal. "You want to know why Jake and I don't have children? Why your precious son sought comfort in another woman's arms? It's because I can't have children. I'm infertile." Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's face paled. "That's right," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion. "I've known for years, but I couldn't bear to tell anyone, not even Jake. I was too afraid of losing him, of disappointing everyone. But you know what? I'm not afraid anymore." I turned to Martha, my eyes blazing. "Your constant nagging about grandchildren, your snide comments about my career, did you ever stop to think about how that made me feel? Did you ever consider that there might be a reason we didn't have children yet?" Martha began to sob, but I wasn't finished. I rounded on Richard. "And you, your belittling remarks, your dismissal of my work, did it make you feel like a big man to tear down your daughter-in-law?" Richard opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "No, I don't want to hear it. I'm done with your excuses, your judgment, your toxic family dynamics. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make sure Jake pays for every lie he's told." As I turned to leave, Martha called out, "Naomi, wait. We didn't know. We never meant." I paused at the door, looking back at their shell-shocked faces. "It's too late for apologies. You've made your bed, now lie in it. And tell him he hasn't seen anything yet." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the family I'd lost, anger at the betrayal, but also a fierce determination. Jake and his parents had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. "It's time," I said. Let's take him for everything he's got. I stormed into Jake's parents' house, my lawyer's words still ringing in my ears. We've got him cornered, Naomi. Don't let them manipulate you. The living room fell silent as I entered, Jake, Martha, and Richard all turning to stare at me with a mix of fear and apprehension. Naomi, Jake started, rising from his seat. I'm glad you're here. We need to talk. Oh, we're well past talking, I cut him off, my voice ice cold. I'm here to settle this once and for all. Martha stepped forward, wringing her hands. Please, dear, let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. I laughed bitterly. Rationally? Like how you've all been acting so rationally behind my back. Richard's face reddened. Now see here, young lady. No, you see here, I snapped, silencing him with a glare. I've had enough of your condescension and your lies, all of you. Jake approached me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Naomi, I know I've made mistakes, but... Mistakes, I echoed, my voice rising. Is that what you call having an affair and planning a new life with another woman? Martha gasped, her eyes darting between Jake and me. Jake, what is she talking about? I turned to Martha, my eyes blazing. Oh, don't pretend you didn't know. In fact, why don't you tell me exactly what you knew? Martha's face paled, and she stumbled back, collapsing onto the sofa. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, I shouted, my composure finally cracking. I want the truth, all of it right now. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Then, to my shock, Martha began to sob. We just wanted grandchildren, she wailed, her words tumbling out in a rush. We thought if Jake met someone else, someone younger. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of her words sank in. You engineered Jake's affair? I whispered, disbelief coloring my voice. Richard stepped forward, his face a mask of shame and defiance. Now, Naomi, you have to understand. We only wanted what was best for Jake, for the family. Best for the family? I repeated, my voice rising hysterically. You destroyed your son's marriage, and you think that was best for the family? Jake stood frozen, his face ashen. Mom, Dad, is this true? Martha nodded miserably. We introduced you to Claire at that charity gala. We encouraged her to pursue you. I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. All this time I'd blamed myself, my infertility, my focus on my career, but it had been them orchestrating this betrayal from the shadows. How could you? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. How could you do this to me? To us? Jake turned to me, his eyes pleading. Naomi, I swear, I didn't know. I mean, yes, I made my own choices, but I had no idea they were behind it. I shook my head, backing away from all of them. It doesn't matter. Don't you see? This family is toxic. You've all been lying and manipulating each other, and for what? Some twisted idea of what a perfect family should be? Martha reached out to me. Naomi, please. We can fix this. We can start over. No. I cut her off, my voice firm despite my tears. There's no fixing this. You've broken something that can never be repaired. I turned to Jake, meeting his eyes one last time. I hope you and Claire are very happy together. You deserve each other. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I felt a strange mix of devastation and liberation. My world had been shattered, but from the ruins I would build something new, something honest, something mine. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. It's time, I said, my voice steady. Let's end this once and for all. Little did they know, I had one last card to play, and it would change everything. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding. Today was the day everything would change. My lawyer, Sarah, squeezed my arm reassuringly. You've got this, Naomi. Remember, we have all the evidence. I nodded, taking a deep breath as we entered the building. Jake, Martha, and Richard were already there, huddled together with their lawyer. Jake's eyes met mine, a mixture of guilt and defiance in his gaze. As we took our seats, the judge entered and the proceedings began. Jake's lawyer presented their case first, painting me as a career-obsessed wife who neglected her family duties. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to remain calm. Then it was our turn. Sarah stood, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, we have evidence that will change everything you've heard today. She presented the recordings I'd made of Martha and Richard, admitting to engineering Jake's affair, the text messages between Jake and Claire, and financial records showing how Jake had been funneling money into a separate account for his new life with Claire. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jake's face paled. while Martha and Richard looked shell-shocked. The judge called for order, his face stern. "Mr. Thompson," he addressed Jake, "do you have anything to say about these allegations?" Jake stood slowly, his shoulders slumped. "Your Honor, I can't deny it. My parents did introduce me to Claire, but—" he paused, taking a deep breath. "But I made my own choices. I betrayed my wife, and I'm deeply ashamed." Martha let out a strangled sob. "Jake, no. We did it for you, for the family." The judge silenced her with a sharp look. "Mrs. Thompson, you'll have your chance to speak. Now, Mr. Thompson, continue." Jake turned to face me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Naomi, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but you deserve to know the truth. Yes, my parents introduced me to Claire, but I pursued the affair. I let their pressure about having children cloud my judgment. I was weak, and I hurt you in the worst way possible." The courtroom fell silent. I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. My hands shook as I stood. "Your Honor," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "I have one more thing to add." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to reveal. "The reason Jake and I didn't have children, it's because I can't. I'm infertile." Gasps echoed through the room. Martha's hand flew to her mouth, while Richard's face drained of color. "I've known for years," I continued, tears streaming down my face. "But I was too afraid to tell anyone, even Jake. I was terrified of losing him, of disappointing everyone. But now I see that my silence only made things worse." I turned to face Jake and his parents directly. "Your constant pressure, your manipulation, your betrayal, it all stems from this obsession with having the perfect family. Well, guess what? There's no such thing as a perfect family, and in trying to create one, you've destroyed everything we had." The judge cleared his throat, his expression somber. "This is clearly a complex situation with fault on multiple sides. We'll take a brief recess, and then I'll deliver my decision." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The truth was finally out. All of it. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sarah touched my arm. "Naomi, there's someone here to see you." I turned to see Claire standing nervously in the hallway. My heart raced as I approached her, unsure of what to expect. "Naomi," she said, her voice shaking, "I have something you need to hear. Something that will change everything." As Claire began to speak, I realized that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter. Claire's revelation hit me like a tidal wave. She wasn't just Jake's mistress, she was carrying his child. The irony was almost too much to bear. All those years of pressure, of feeling inadequate, and now this. I stumbled back into the courtroom, my mind reeling. Jake's eyes met mine, confusion etched across his face. He didn't know. Not yet. The judge called the session to order, ready to deliver his verdict. But I couldn't let it end like this. I stood up, my voice shaking but determined. "Your Honor, if I may, there's been a new development." The judge nodded, and I took a deep breath. "Claire, Jake's companion, is pregnant with his child." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Martha let out a strangled cry of joy, while Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. Jake sat there, stunned into silence. "Order!" The judge's gavel came down hard. "Mrs. Thompson, is this verified?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Claire is here to confirm it herself." As Claire was brought in to testify, I watched the faces of those who had hurt me so deeply. Martha and Richard, their manipulative scheme finally bearing fruit, but at what cost? Jake, the father-to-be, looking lost and ashamed. When the dust settled, the judge delivered his final verdict. The divorce was granted, with a settlement heavily in my favor due to Jake's infidelity and financial deception. But it felt hollow. No amount of money could heal the wounds inflicted by their betrayal. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Jake. "Naomi, I don't know what to say." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. "There's nothing left to say, Jake. You're going to be a father. Isn't that what you always wanted?" His face crumpled. "Not like this. Never like this." I shook my head, a sad smile on my face. "It's too late for regrets now. You've made your choices. Now you have to live with them." As I turned to leave, Martha approached, her eyes brimming with tears. "Naomi, dear, please. Can't we talk about this? We're still family." "No," I cut her off firmly. "We're not family. We never really were. You made sure of that." I walked away, leaving them all behind. Sarah, my lawyer and friend, fell into step beside me. "So, What now? She asked gently. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. Now I start over, on my terms. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I moved back into my old apartment, which I'd kept as a secret sanctuary all this time. I poured my energy into my work, finally free to pursue my career without guilt or judgment. The clothing line Jake and I had been developing? I bought out his share and rebranded it as a line for strong, independent women. It was a hit, far more successful than it ever would have been under Jake's influence. As for children, I decided to become a mentor to young girls interested in publishing. It wasn't the family I'd once dreamed of, but it filled my heart in ways I never expected. 1 year to the day after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my apartment looking out over the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, inviting me to dinner to celebrate my recent promotion. As I grabbed my coat, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more content than the one who had lived in fear of disappointing others. I smiled at my reflection. "You did it, Naomi," I whispered. "You found your happy ending." As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road had been hard, the betrayals deep, but I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time I was the author of my own destiny.
"I'm not asking for a favor, Rachel," my dad said, his voice colder than I remembered. "I'm asking you to do your job." The words stung more than I expected. For a moment, I couldn't respond. I sat there gripping the edge of my desk, staring at the man who hadn't been a part of my life for over 20 years. His expression was hard, his tone even harder, and I couldn't decide if it was anger or desperation I heard in his voice. "My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 31 years old, a defense lawyer with a solid career, and a single woman focused on her work. For as long as I can remember, my relationship with my dad has been defined by his absence. He left when I was 9, walking away from my mom and me without so much as a goodbye. Now, 2 decades later, he was sitting across from me, asking for my help. No, kind of demanding it, and I didn't know how to feel. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my thoughts. "You're asking me to defend you in court," I said, keeping my voice even. "But let's not pretend this is just about me doing my job. You need my help, Dad. And after everything, you think you can just walk in here and demand it?" He shifted uncomfortably, but didn't look away. "This isn't personal, Rachel. It's business. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you were the best option." Business. Of course he would frame it that way. My dad had always been about transactions, what people could do for him, what he could get in return. Still, I couldn't ignore the flicker of something else in his voice. Was it guilt? Regret? I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to care. "I need to think about it," I said finally, my voice firmer than I felt. "If you'll excuse me, I have other clients waiting." He nodded stiffly and stood, smoothing his suit jacket. "Take your time," he said, though his tone implied the opposite. "But remember, Rachel, I'm fighting for my life here." As soon as he walked out, the tension in the room lingered. I stared at the empty chair he'd just vacated, my thoughts a mess. It wasn't the first time I'd faced a challenging case, but this wasn't just about legal strategy. This was him, the man who left my mom struggling to pay bills, who missed every milestone in my life, and who had been a ghost until now. That night, I called Jessica, my mentor and the closest thing I had to a maternal figure since my mom passed. "He just showed up out of nowhere, Jess," I said, pacing my apartment. Like he had every right to ask me for help. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he did, just, "I need you." Jessica sighed on the other end of the line. "Rachel, this is tough, but you're a lawyer first. The question is, can you separate your personal feelings from the professional obligation?" I stopped pacing and stared out the window at the city lights. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not sure I have a choice." Over the next couple of days, I buried myself in the case file my dad had left behind. It was a mess. He was being accused of embezzling millions from his company, Monroe Investments, and the evidence wasn't exactly in his favor. Bank transfers, falsified reports, and discrepancies in financial records, it all pointed to him. If I took this case, I'd be fighting an uphill battle. But the more I read, the more something felt off. The transactions were too calculated, too clean for my dad. He'd always been impulsive, not the kind of man to pull off something this meticulous. That's when I started digging into his business partner, Alan Carter. His name popped up in a few key documents, and the more I looked, the more I realized he stood to gain if my dad took the fall. I wasn't sure what to do with that information yet, but it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. Late one night, after hours of poring over documents, I called Jessica again. "This case doesn't add up," I told her. "I think someone set him up. Maybe his partner, Alan." Jessica was quiet for a moment before she replied, "Rachel, if that's true, you're not just defending your father. You're exposing a deeper issue. Are you ready for what that means?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know if I'm ready, Jess, but I think I have to do this." The next morning, I made my decision. I called my dad and told him I'd take the case, but under one condition, I was running it my way. No interference, no half-truths. To my surprise, he agreed without argument, though I could hear the tension in his voice. Maybe he knew how serious this was, or maybe he realized he didn't have any other options. Preparing for the first hearing was overwhelming. I had to comb through years of financial records, interview employees, and piece together a narrative that didn't make my dad look like a criminal. All the while, I wrestled with my own feelings. Defending him wasn't just about the case. It felt like stepping into a minefield of unresolved anger and hurt. But I kept telling myself this wasn't personal. This was about doing my job and uncovering the truth. The first time we met in my office to prepare, the tension was thick. He sat across from me, his body language closed off, but his eyes occasionally softened when he thought I wasn't looking. I kept it professional, walking him through the strategy and what I needed from him. But at one point, he broke the silence. "You're good at this," he said, almost reluctantly. I didn't expect this level of competence. I froze for a moment, unsure whether to take it as a compliment or an insult. "I've been doing this for a long time," I replied evenly. "It's what I do." He nodded but didn't say anything else, and just like that, we were back to business. As the weeks went by, the case started to come together, though not without its challenges. Alan Carter, my dad's business partner, was slippery. His deposition was filled with carefully worded statements that hinted at my dad's guilt, while conveniently glossing over his own involvement. I could feel the pressure mounting, both in the courtroom and in my personal life. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I sat down with Jessica over coffee. "He's not an easy client," I admitted. "Half the time it feels like he's holding something back. The other half, he seems genuinely desperate." Jessica sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "That's the thing about family," she said. "They're not just clients. They're a mirror. Every conversation, every argument, it's all tangled up with years of history. But you're doing the right thing, Rachel. You're getting to the truth." Her words stayed with me as we moved closer to the trial date. The more I worked on the case, the more I realized how much was at stake, not just for my dad, but for me. This wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the past and handle this with integrity. During one of our late-night meetings, the tension finally boiled over. We were reviewing a timeline of transactions when I noticed my dad staring out the window, his attention miles away. "Something on your mind?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just thinking." I set my pen down and leaned back in my chair. "Thinking about what? How you ended up here? Or is it about how you left me and Mom when I was a kid?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't try to soften them. For a moment he looked taken aback, as if I'd hit a nerve he wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Rachel, he started, but I wasn't about to let him dodge this. No, I interrupted. We're not brushing past this. You walked out on us, and you never came back. Do you have any idea what that did to Mom? What it did to me? And now you show up in my life. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but because you need something. Do you even care? His face tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might get defensive. But instead, he sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. You're right, he said quietly. I don't have an excuse. I made mistakes, big ones, and the truth is, I didn't think I had the right to come back after everything. His admission caught me off guard. I had spent years imagining what I'd say to him if I ever got the chance, but I never expected him to admit fault so openly. You didn't even try, I said, my voice trembling. You left us to pick up the pieces. He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the window. And I regret it every single day. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. I don't understand why I took your case in the first place, I said, my voice laced with frustration. After everything you've done, or really haven't done, why am I here helping you? He paused, his gaze fixed on the papers scattered across the table. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of regret and something that looked almost like admiration. Maybe it's because you're a better person than I am, he said softly. I stared at him, taken aback. That's not an answer, I snapped, though his words had thrown me off balance. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing my job. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Maybe that's part of it. But the truth is, Rachel, you've got something I never had. Integrity. You could have walked away. You had every right to. But you didn't. Because you have something I lost a long time ago. You actually care about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. No integrity? Are you saying you're guilty of this case too? My voice was sharp, cutting through the tense silence. His expression hardened instantly. No, he said firmly, shaking his head. I didn't do what they're accusing me of, Rachel. I might have made bad decisions in my life, plenty of them, but I didn't steal from my own company. I'm not a thief. I studied him closely, trying to read his face. There was something about his tone, an edge of desperation, that made me believe him, at least in that moment. But the past had left me with too much doubt to fully trust him. Then why does the evidence point straight to you? I asked. The transfers, the falsified records, all of it leads back to your name. That's what I'm trying to figure out, he said, his voice rising with frustration. And that's why I need you. Someone set me up, Rachel. I know how it looks, but I didn't do this. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of pity for him, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. You better hope I can prove that, I said, standing up, because if you're lying, I'm not going to cover for you. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the case, determined to uncover the truth. Alan Carter's name kept coming up in the records, his involvement just subtle enough to escape notice unless you were really looking. It was clear he had positioned himself to benefit from my dad's downfall, but I needed more than suspicions. I needed hard evidence. During one of our strategy meetings, I laid everything out on the table. Alan had access to the accounts, the records, everything, I explained, pointing to the timeline I'd constructed. He's been distancing himself from this company for months, quietly liquidating assets and transferring them to his private holdings. If we can prove he had motive and opportunity, we can shift the focus away from you. My dad listened intently, a rare moment of silence from a man who usually had something to say. Do you really think he's behind all this? He asked, his voice cautious. I do, I replied. But it's not about what I think. It's about what I can prove. And if Alan is as smart as he seems, he's covered his tracks well. It's going to take more than circumstantial evidence to clear your name. The turning point came during a pre-trial deposition. One of Alan Carter's employees, a senior manager named Ellen Price, was called in to provide testimony. At first, her answers were routine, calm, composed, and not particularly revealing. But as I pressed her about the financial discrepancies and Alan's involvement, I noticed her demeanor shift. She started glancing toward the door, her voice faltering ever so slightly. Finally, I decided to take a chance. "Ms. Price," I said, my tone firm but not accusatory. "Is there anything you'd like to share about Mr. Carter's role in this situation? Anything you might have overheard or witnessed that could provide clarity?" She hesitated, visibly torn. The room was silent, save for the faint scratching of the court stenographer's pen. Then, with a deep breath, she said, "There was a phone call, a couple of months ago. I overheard Mr. Carter saying, 'Michael is the perfect scapegoat.'" Her words were barely above a whisper, but they hit like a thunderclap. I exchanged a quick glance with my co-counsel. "Did you report this at the time?" I asked. Ellen shook her head. "No, I didn't think it was my place, but it's been bothering me ever since. I didn't know if it was relevant until now." While her testimony was a crucial breakthrough, I knew it wasn't enough on its own. We needed something concrete, material proof to back her claims. Without it, Alan could easily argue that her account was hearsay or a misinterpretation. I thanked her for her honesty, promising to follow up. Later that evening, I went over the deposition with our IT investigator, who had been combing through digital records for weeks. "We're close," he said, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop screen. "I've been sifting through old email archives, and there are still a few backup files I haven't finished scanning. If Alan left a trail, it's going to be in there." The waiting felt endless, but I held on to the hope that somewhere in the digital dust of Alan's emails was the proof we needed to expose the truth. 2 days later, just as I was beginning to lose hope, the call came. It was our IT investigator, his tone brimming with urgency. "Rachel, I found it," he said. I sat up straighter in my chair. "Found what?" "An email Alan sent to an external accountant," he explained. "It's vague, but he clearly references shifting the blame to your father. He deleted it, but the backup archives preserved a copy. The timestamp lines up perfectly with the period when the financial discrepancies started." My pulse quickened. "What exactly does it say?" He read it aloud. "The way things are structured, Michael will take the fall if this goes south. Keep everything tight on your end." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "It's not just a mistake, Rachel. It's deliberate." I exhaled, relief washing over me. This is it. This is the proof we need. He wasn't done. I also cross-checked the IP address from which the email was sent. It matches Alan's office computer. There's no plausible way he can deny it came from him. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the notes on my desk. Between Ellen's testimony and this email, the puzzle pieces were finally coming together. I had the tools to not only clear my dad's name, but also bring Alan's deceit into the light. The next step was presenting it in court. As much as I wanted to celebrate the breakthrough, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The day of the court presentation arrived, and the weight of the case pressed down on me as I walked into the courtroom. My dad sat next to me, uncharacteristically quiet, his face a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I placed the folder containing the email and deposition notes on the table in front of me, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. As the proceedings began, the opposing counsel tried to paint my dad as reckless and untrustworthy, a man whose carelessness had jeopardized his company. But I stayed calm, biding my time until it was my turn to present the evidence. When the judge called on me, I rose, holding the email copy in my hand. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "we have new evidence that sheds light on this case. It directly implicates Alan Carter in a deliberate attempt to frame my client." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as I handed copies of the email to the judge and opposing counsel. "This email," I continued, "was retrieved from a backup server after Mr. Carter attempted to delete it. In it, he clearly outlines a plan to shift blame onto my client, Michael Monroe, should the financial discrepancies come under scrutiny." I let the room absorb the gravity of the evidence before adding, "Furthermore, we have corroborating testimony from an employee who overheard Mr. Carter referring to my client as the perfect scapegoat." The judge nodded, signaling for me to continue. "This isn't a case of negligence or incompetence on my client's part. This is a calculated effort by Mr. Carter to cover his tracks and deflect responsibility." For the first time during the trial, I saw Alan's composure crack. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing nervously at his attorney. My dad, on the other hand, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: respect. As the judge reviewed the evidence and listened to closing arguments, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. I kept my focus on the judge's expression, searching for any sign of where things might be headed. When the gavel finally struck, signaling an adjournment, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "The court finds sufficient grounds to shift its focus to the allegations against Mr. Alan Carter," the judge declared. "The trial concerning Michael Monroe is adjourned indefinitely, pending further investigation of the new evidence provided." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. My dad turned to me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he looked like he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded, as if acknowledging everything I'd done. In the days that followed, the charges against my dad were formally dismissed. The focus shifted entirely to Alan, who quickly found himself at the center of a full-blown investigation. The media caught wind of the story, and headlines about Alan's alleged misconduct dominated the news. For the first time, my dad was free of the cloud of suspicion that had hung over him for months. But for me, the victory felt complicated. Clearing his name had been my goal, but it also brought back memories and emotions I wasn't prepared to deal with. The evening after the charges were dismissed, my dad and I met in my office. He had asked for a meeting, his tone uncharacteristically soft when he called. As he walked in, I noticed how different he looked, less guarded, almost vulnerable. He took a seat across from me, the silence stretching as he seemed to search for the right words. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice low, "for everything you've done. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm grateful." I leaned back, folding my arms. "You don't have to thank me. I did what I was supposed to do as your lawyer." He flinched slightly at my tone, but he nodded. "You were more than just my lawyer. You saved my life, Rachel. And you did it despite everything I put you through. I didn't deserve that kind of loyalty." I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. "It wasn't loyalty," I said finally. "It was about doing what was right. And honestly, it wasn't for you. It was for me. To prove that I could rise above all the things you failed to be." His shoulders slumped, the weight of my words settling over him. "I wish I could change the past," he said quietly. "I wish I'd been there for you and your mom, but I can't. All I can do is tell you how proud I am of the person you've become, even if I didn't have a hand in it." For a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Sympathy. But it didn't erase the years of absence and pain. "I don't need your pride," I said, my voice steady. "I needed a father, and I didn't have one when it mattered most." He nodded, unable to argue. "I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I didn't respond, letting the silence speak for itself. I didn't forgive him. At least, not then. Maybe I never will. Some wounds run too deep, and no amount of apologies can erase the scars they leave behind. But as I sat there, watching my father grapple with the weight of his mistakes, I realized something important. I didn't need his approval or his pride. What I needed was to prove to myself that I could rise above the pain, the abandonment, and the doubt. And I had. I cleared his name, uncovered the truth, and showed him the person that I was. As he left my office that day, I stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. I wasn't the little girl he had walked away from anymore. I was Rachel Monroe, a woman who had fought for her own worth, and I felt proud of myself. Hey there, Did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
You too smell poor. The stench of poverty is wafting over here. Gross, it's going to soak into my expensive clothes. Poor people making under $50,000 a year need to disappear. When Matt and Sherry ran into me by chance, they looked at me with disdain. They even pitted Paul, who was next to me, as a low-wage worker with dirty hands. 15 years ago, Matt suddenly left me and remarried. His new partner was a doctor's daughter. What's so great about a doctor's daughter? Amid their laughter, Paul straightened his back and spoke up. Are you mistaken? $50,000 is my monthly income. What? For a moment, both of them furrowed their brows in confusion. But then they burst out laughing. Yeah, right, stop lying like a little kid. Amazing. Do you get your salary in $10,000 bills from a children's bank? I had always been scared of Matt. I couldn't stand up to him. But now, after 15 years, the tables have turned and it's time to show him. I am Angela Norman, a housewife in my 40s. I've been busy lately but finally got a haircut and a thorough head spa, which refreshed me. Touching my neatly trimmed hair sometimes makes my chest feel tight, because it reminds me of the past days that feel crushing. Please, just listen to a bit of my old story. I first got married almost 15 years ago when I was 27. Unfortunately, it wasn't a sweet honeymoon from the start. Right after the wedding, Matt quit his job and became a house husband. He felt undervalued at work and was stressed. It was always tough, but he seemed to have endured it by keeping up appearances. We started at the same company, but I regret not realizing his struggles. I was a full-time employee, so it was no problem. So, I vowed to support him. However, we're short on living expenses. As a house husband, Matt always seemed grumpy. He complained about the lack of living expenses every month. Are we short again? It's only mid-month. What can I do when the money you give me is so little? But I was able to live alone on half this budget. Suddenly, Matt glared at me. Are you saying it's my fault? It's impossible to suddenly get used to housework like a woman. I clean and cook for you, so why am I being complained at? Matt threw a tantrum like a child, stamping his feet and ranting quickly. Eventually, I stopped giving living expenses to Matt, and he managed my salary instead. I would get a monthly allowance of $200, but even that soon stopped. The budget is tight this month, too. I can't give you any allowance. Then, can you at least give me some money for the department's drinking party? A drinking party? You're too incompetent and earn too little to go to such things. Every time Matt shouted, I became afraid to speak. He wasn't always like this. He was a kind and cheerful man. I think he was beloved by both men and women at the company. His current attitude must be because he's tired. I thought to myself, just be kind to him for now, but that for now went on for 3 months. 6 months. I couldn't see the end of just for now. Here's your lunch sandwiches. I woke up early again today even though I'm still sleepy, just for you. He used to pack sandwiches with ham or tuna, but recently it's just cheese. But today's sandwiches are plain. I wonder if there's even anything in it. This month's salary was $2,700. Isn't that too little overtime? You understand we can't live properly with 2 adults on this, right? You should be grateful you can even eat a tuna sandwich with your incompetence. Yeah. Make sure your take-home next month is over $3,000. Okay. I want to do better, but somehow I can't muster the energy. As I nibbled on my breakfast toast, a sigh escaped me. Right after, Matt sighed even louder than me. Being a section manager isn't all that, huh? It's probably just because they have to give women positions too. Just picked you as section manager for the heck of it. If being a section manager meant better pay, then maybe, but look at this. A female section manager is just for show, the salary tells it all. I'm sorry. If I had been a section manager, I could have contributed more to the company. Maybe Matt decided to resign because I got a position before him, hurting his pride. If that's the case, his breakdown is my fault. I can't blame Matt. I have to obey him. After breakfast, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I got a shock. In the mirror, there was an ugly old woman. Dark circles under her eyes, deep laugh lines, and her hair was a frizzy mix of gray. I have to do better. I wet my parched hands with cold water and tied my hair back. Once I fixed my hair, I transformed from an old woman to a dignified career woman. One day, I was out for work and headed straight home. It was earlier than usual. The area was still bright, with mothers with young children and students around. The station was nearby, but I started walking in the opposite direction. For some reason, the side towards the station felt gloomily dark. I didn't want to board the train that would take me to the home where Matt was waiting. Though it was nearly spring, the air was still a bit cold, and the wind stung my cheeks. When I touched my cheek, it felt rough and dry, probably peeling. Oh, a trendy cafe. I'd love a warm cafe au lait. But maybe I need a moisturizer more. I muttered to myself as I passed by the cafe when a man fast walked to me. Hello. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, a refreshing sight. It seemed like he was smiling at me. But there was no way he was talking to me, so I looked down. However, the man peered into my face. Are you interested in being a hair model? He was definitely looking into my eyes when he asked. I don't remember what he said next or how I responded. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a chair in a clean, stylish space. Getting my hair cut by a hairstylist named Paul. How does it look? About an hour later, the mirror reflected a younger version of myself. My hair, once frizzy, now had a glossy shine. There were no waves or frizz, and my fingers slid through it smoothly. It's like I'm a different person. You look very beautiful. I knew it was just a compliment, but I couldn't help but smile. I was a bit skeptical about being a free haircut model, thinking it might be a scam. But Paul truly worked magic on me. The sweet scent of shampoo wafted from my hair. Paul gently stroked my hair, and somehow, the tension in my shoulders and the rest of my body melted away. I used to think it didn't matter if my hair was frizzy or gray as long as it was tied back. But it feels good to be beautiful. If you'd like, please let me cut your hair again. Paul treated my hair with the care of a glass artisan. It had been a while since I felt cherished by someone. Just an hour ago, my legs felt heavy, but now they felt light. It was getting dark, and the station was lit up. I boarded the train with my back straight and went home. How's your day? What happened to your hair? As soon as he saw me, Matt's eyes widened. I answered with a shy smile. You know, I was asked to be a haircut model, so I got it cut. Oh, and it was free. Really free. Amazing, right? My overgrown hair is now a short bob. I didn't expect him to say it suited me. I hoped he'd say something like "You look refreshed," or "Lucky it was free," and laugh. But Matt's face twisted in an instant. What? Free? That's a lie, right? You're a low earner and incompetent. And you just went off and spent money on your own, right? You leave me to do the housework while you go out and have fun? I was taken aback by his unexpected response and stumbled over my words. No, it really was free. Look, I don't have any money in my wallet. There's no way I could go to a salon. Are you indirectly asking for pocket money? You have a terrible personality. What? That wasn't my intention at all. When was the last time I had a normal conversation with Matt? Tonight's dinner was still in plastic containers from the supermarket. If I said, "This is tasty," he would likely snap. So you think store-bought food is better than anything I could make? If I tried to fold the mountain of laundry on the sofa, he'd surely get upset, thinking it was a dig at him. So, I always just dug out whatever clothes I needed from the pile. I noticed a few wrinkles, but if I ironed them, Matt would explode. I had always been careful not to upset Matt, who was struggling with his mental health. It was pointless to insist that the haircut model was free, or that I was happy my hair looked nice. I'm sorry. Recently, our conversations had devolved into Matt getting angry and me apologizing. That was all. Being with Matt was exhausting. However, the option to distance myself from him had never crossed my mind. I didn't want to cause unnecessary worry to people from our former workplace. So I told them Matt left his job to advance his career. That's why he still keeps in touch with former colleagues. If they found out I had abandoned him while he was unwell, I would probably feel very uncomfortable. Then I thought, I only thought about myself. Wanting to distance myself from Matt or worried about my status at work. I didn't even try to support Matt, who was suffering. I hated this cold-hearted side of myself. I didn't want to face Matt either. So, I began to live each day with an empty heart. Without any conflicts, thinking I was living peacefully. But the peaceful everyday life suddenly collapsed. I've decided to get married. When I returned from work, Matt suddenly announced this. Married? I was confused. We were already married. Matt began to tremble and then burst into laughter. I stood frozen in the entrance, still not understanding. Then, a woman I didn't recognize appeared from the living room door down the hallway. Matt casually draped his arm around her shoulder. I'm going to marry Sherry. The woman named Sherry nestled her cheek against Matt's chest and flashed me a triumphant smile. Sorry, ma'am. I'm taking your Matt. Taking him. But that's... I looked so confused and ridiculous that they couldn't stop laughing. Just like Matt said, you really are a dirty old woman, ma'am. No wonder he wanted to cheat. But don't worry, we know it's not the wife who let him cheat but Matt who is at fault. Rest assured, we'll generously provide compensation. You're just a section manager but can't earn more than $50,000, such a useless woman. You want money, right? $10,000? $20,000? You can name any amount you like. My father is a doctor. We have money, so don't worry. And just like that, my marriage with Matt ended unceremoniously. I remember my parents, in their anger, demanded $50,000 in compensation. But we only received $10,000. It was frustrating, but dealing with Matt was too painful, so I reluctantly accepted it. That's the end of my sad story. 15 years after that divorce, I still occasionally think of Matt. Let's forget the past. I smoothed my freshly cut hair with both hands, trying to calm my troubled heart. The next day, I went to a suburban shopping mall with my husband. "Is that you, Angela?" A familiar, unforgettable voice called from behind me. Maybe it was just a hallucination because I had been reminiscing about the unpleasant past just the day before. "Ah, it is Angela." A man suddenly appeared in front of me. Could this be a hallucination too? I blinked several times to check, but it was definitely Matt. Sherry, his affair partner from that time, was also with him. Wow, nostalgic, it's Angela. This girl, my ex-wife. The stain on my life. Matt was as exuberant as if he had reunited with an old friend. Feeling a pang in my heart, I clung to my husband's arm. Huh? No way, a man? What, Angela, you remarried? Ah, congratulations on your remarriage. Matt and Sherry smirked unpleasantly. In contrast, my current husband, Paul, and I remained serious. Sherry looked Paul up and down from head to toe with a pitying expression. "Oh dear, your husband's hands are rough." "Oh, and so are yours, ma'am." "Poor thing, you must be struggling." Matt's gaze fell on our hands. "Wow, it's true. Those are definitely the hands of poor people who've struggled. So filthy. You two really stink of poverty." The stench of poverty is drifting this way. Ugh, it's going to soak into my expensive clothes. People making under $50,000 a year should just disappear. He approached us suddenly and started insulting us unilaterally. Matt exaggeratedly pinched his nose and waved his hands in front of his face. I don't know what poverty is supposed to smell like. But Sherry's strong perfume was far more unpleasant. I lightly held my nose, which felt like it could bend. Paul looked puzzled and asked, "An income of $50,000? What are you talking about?" "That's Angela's salary." Wow, Sherry, you still remember Angela's salary. Well, I have a good memory. Poor lady, working so hard just to make $50,000, right? I suppose your husband is also a low-wage worker being exploited. I remember, too. Sherry is a doctor's daughter. I wonder how great being a doctor's daughter is supposed to be. Amid Matt and Sherry's laughter, Paul straightened up and spoke. "Are you perhaps mistaken? $50,000 is the monthly income." What? For a moment, both furrowed their brows in confusion. But then laughter erupted from both of them. Nice lie. Stop with the childish lies, please. Wow, amazing. Do you get your salary in $10,000 bills from a children's bank? The two clutched their stomachs as if in pain from laughing. Matt and Sherry seemed more childish than actual children, offensively so in their lack of intellect. I had always been scared of Matt. I couldn't stand up to him. I still dream of him sometimes, and when I remember those moments, it feels like my chest is being crushed. But the Matt who appeared before me after 15 years was just a foolish bully, nothing to fear. What was I ever afraid of in Matt? It felt like a lump that had been stuck in my throat for a long time suddenly fell away. My voice flowed naturally. It's not a lie. My husband and I run a beauty salon. Nice lie. Beauty salons in fashionable areas have no entry for ugly old ladies. Oddly, Matt's taunts drifted past me like a light breeze. That over there is one of our beauty salons. I pointed at a beauty salon inside the shopping mall. Shall we drop by? I took Paul's arm and started walking. Matt and Sherry giggled as they followed behind us. probably expecting me to stop any minute and make up a ridiculous excuse. I walked confidently ahead of them and without hesitation, opened the door to the salon. "Welcome." A female hairstylist greeted us pleasantly. Matt puffed up his cheeks, trying to hold back his laughter, and joked, "It's a visit from the owners." "Huh?" "Yes." "Are you friends of the owner and the vice president?" "We're always grateful for their support." "Huh?" Caught off guard by the serious response, Matt and Sherry were stunned. Paul smiled warmly at them. "Do you understand now that it wasn't a lie? This is one of the beauty salons we manage." Matt muttered with a frozen expression. "It's a lie." "It's not a lie." Looking desperate for me to tell him it was a lie, Matt looked at me for help. But I couldn't give him the answer he wanted because we truly are the owners of the salon. I still remember the day Matt left me. "I thought I was supporting you through your struggles. But you cheated with wealthy Sherry and easily discarded me, which hurt a lot." Somehow, thinking about that day no longer made it hard to breathe. I felt as if I was finally free from Matt's spell. After Matt and I split up, I visited the beauty salon where I had been a hair model. When I felt like I was worthless to this world, I remembered how they treated my damaged hair as if it were precious. Could it be that this hairstylist is him? "Did you marry him?" "That's right." I was drowning in sadness. But getting my hair dyed a bright color somehow lifted my spirits. Paul saved me when I wanted to disappear. At the time, Paul, still an apprentice, dreamed of owning his own shop. Inspired by him, I studied while working and obtained my cosmetology license. Around the same time, Paul realized his dream and opened his own shop. We managed the shop together as a couple and now run several stores. Paul is the president and I am the vice president. I continue to work as a hairstylist even though I'm an owner because I love it. Huh? That doesn't make sense. You, incompetent and low-paid, a hairstylist? An owner? That's a lie. Matt held his head in confusion. Matt used to mock me for being low-paid, but earning $50,000 isn't easy. It was scary to give up a stable job as a salaried worker. But I wanted to chase my dream with Paul. "An old woman like you talking nonsense. Hairstyling is a job for young, cute girls." Indeed, I looked like a wreck and old before. But that's exactly why I aspired to be a hairstylist, to make people beautiful. Caught off guard, Matt examined me from head to toe. Dressed simply but neatly, I smiled gently at Matt. My face may have matured with age. But I'm not the broken old woman Matt had to insult anymore. I can clearly see that I shine brighter in my 40s than I did in my 20s under Matt's control. I'm living a fulfilling life, I conveyed, radiating happiness. As if a halo had appeared behind me, Matt squinted against the brightness and stepped back. A mere hairstylist acting so high and mighty. As Matt fell silent, Sherry sneered. "A hairstylist who makes people beautiful? Hair alone doesn't change a person." Stuck in the past, I had been keeping tabs on Sherry's clinic. Her parents used to run a general practice, which at some point turned into a fancy beauty clinic. Likely, Sherry had started interfering in its management. My clinic creates women's beauty. Can a hairstylist remove facial spots? Can they rejuvenate and remove sagging? It's embarrassing for mere hairstylists who only mess with hair to act so superior. I don't believe that people aren't beautiful because they have spots or sagging. When you get your hair done, you naturally find yourself smiling. Just having clean hair can boost your confidence and help you like yourself more. Everyone who smiles is beautiful. But what's the point of being a breathtaking beauty with a flawless face if you're always frowning, right? Sherry twisted her smooth, egg-like face in displeasure. I've heard quite a bit about your clinic, Sherry. People come to you wanting to become beautiful. But I hear there are many cases of burns and swelling on their faces. What? Stop making weird accusations. My clinic has good reviews. Online reviews can be easily manipulated. But word of mouth directly from person to person? That's something you can't control, can you? Being well connected in the beauty industry, I hear all kinds of rumors, good and bad. I don't even need to look them up, the stories about her clinic just come to me. They say when someone goes to you to remove a single spot, you push them to treat other spots, pores, and sagging that they didn't ask for, right? I'm just trying to make them as beautiful as possible. And you also forcefully push products they don't need for home care, right? I'm just recommending good products. Sherry raised her voice in irritation. The hard sell tactics in a confined private room must be terrifying for the patients. I heard that even when patients clearly suffer burns from the treatments, you tell them it'll heal over time without proper care. I don't know anything about that. I'm not a doctor. It's my father's clinic, so it's none of my business. Indeed, she's not a doctor. That's strange. I've heard stories about the clinic's daughter, a reputedly skilled and beautiful doctor, performing procedures. Sherry opened her mouth with a smug look. Patients would rather have a beautiful woman like me handle their treatment than an old doctor. It's a beauty clinic, after all. Looks are everything. And you pretend to be a doctor? That's an exaggeration. I don't use any knives. It's safe. Lasers and injections are easy enough for anyone to do. Her attitude towards upselling, mishandling procedures, and even impersonating a doctor is chilling. I thought rumors might be exaggerated, but I can't believe they're actually true. I took out my phone from my pocket and said calmly, I'm making a report. Pretending to be a doctor and performing medical procedures without a license is a crime. Sherry gritted her teeth in displeasure. The one to stop me was Matt. A report? To the police? Come on, don't do that. Sherry seems numb to the reality, but Matt is different. He seems aware that they are committing illegal acts. What will happen to our clinic if you report us? Don't be vindictive just because I dumped you. It's not about our past, Matt. It's because I've now confirmed that there is a real problem with the clinic. When Matt realized I was serious, he quickly changed his tune. To be honest, I've been fed up with Sherry's way of doing things. She's too selfish, using her status as a doctor's daughter. I'm breaking up with her. It has nothing to do with me anymore. Go ahead and report. Meeting Angela again made me realize how awful Sherry is. Angela, you're a hard worker, and unlike Sherry, who just leeches off her parents, there's no comparison. Angela, you're a great woman. I like you. Matt's blunt confession made my skin crawl. I almost blurted out EW. What? After all the support I gave you, you say that? What's so great about being a doctor's daughter? You're just living off your parents' money. And besides, your parents don't even make as much as Angela does now. A nasty argument started. I didn't want anything more to do with them, so I pulled on Paul's arm to leave. Angela, wait. I'm serious about you. Matt tried to follow, but Sherry tackled him to the ground. Don't mess with me. If you're going to dump me for her, pay back all the money I spent on you. Enough with the money. You're rich, just keep throwing your money around. Their scuffle turned into a wrestling match in the middle of the mall. Security arrived to separate them. But Sherry broke free from a big man's grasp and lunged at Matt again. "Angela, help. It's not about the money. I like you." Sherry mounted Matt and he reached out to me. It wasn't a laughing matter. But seeing Matt's front tooth broken like a bad skit made me burst out laughing. "Shut up, you leech." Sherry, her egg-like face now veined with anger, headbutt him. They really are an aggressive couple. Paul and I aren't into wrestling, so we just exchanged looks and chuckled. I used to be a wife who only followed Matt. But Sherry clearly communicates her opinions and fists directly to Matt. They seem quite well matched. Later, as I had declared, I reported Sherry's clinic. It caused a major uproar with many victims emerging. The clinic was immediately shut down, and Sherry tried to disappear with her parents. But they were promptly sued by a group of victims and caught. Sherry, especially, faced severe charges for medical practices without a license, adding assault and fraud to her crimes, leading to a prison sentence without suspension. She won't be able to maintain her proud beauty inside prison. Matt was also suspected of complicity but was acquitted. However, during the investigation, embezzlement was uncovered. It seems he had been secretly selling the clinic's expensive home care products on a flea market site. Sherry reportedly screamed, "Give him the death penalty." But Matt only got a suspended sentence because the stolen amount wasn't large. There are no more problems between me and you, Angela. Let's start over. Later, unbelievably, Matt appeared before me. I've definitely cut ties with Sherry, who committed a grave sin. Angela, you're the best. I like you. Sorry for making you wait so long. He tried to strike a princely pose, but it was just gross. I'm not waiting for you. You've also committed a major crime and are on probation. You're not in a position to speak ill of Sherry. Don't be so tough. I'll treat you right this time. I could only be amazed at Matt's delusional thinking. If, just hypothetically, I were to start over with Matt. At my words, a sparkle appeared in Matt's eyes. I would have to quit the business I run with Paul. Even if I start a new job now, I doubt I'd make even $50,000 a year, let alone $50,000 a month. Would that be okay? However, the sparkle in Matt's eyes clouded over instantly. See, it's not me you love. You just love money. 15 years ago, I was concerned that I had wounded his pride by advancing in my career before him. But in reality, Matt has no pride. He just wants to be taken care of by a woman, to live comfortably without effort. If you love money so much, it would be quicker to earn it yourself. Oh, maybe you can't, which is why you leech off women. I remember I got promoted before you did. What? There's no way I'm inferior to you. You only got the section chief position because you're a woman, it's a special quota. I'm obviously better. It seems Matt did have a shred of pride after all. Although I had been submissive before, in his heart, he must have looked down on me as a woman. Who would bother with an old woman like you? After receiving this humiliation from me, whom he deemed inferior, he threw out these last words and disappeared. This should mean he won't come back to me anymore. Sometime later, I heard through the grapevine that Matt had been arrested by the police. He had been following young women around, and at one point even hugged one from behind. Maybe being scorned by an older woman like me made him want to prove he could attract younger women. Although he had a tendency towards emotional abuse, he wasn't the type to commit a crime before. Perhaps Sherry's ease with breaking the law had lowered his barriers to committing crimes. Environment is important, I suppose. Since it's been 15 years since we severed ties, it's entirely someone else's problem now. Thinking hypothetically about separating from Paul, I realized I have no intention of leaving him. I am thoroughly satisfied with my life with Paul. It might sound exaggerated, but I am the protagonist of my life. I don't want to return to the days when I was controlled by Matt, losing my emotions and merely surviving. I refuse to be a side character in someone else's story. Today, I went to see your shop. Is that so? You should have called me. You seemed busy. More importantly, the customers coming out of the shop were all smiles, constantly touching their silky hair. I suddenly remembered the first time Paul cut my hair. I was truly happy then. Holding on to that joy, I always pick up my scissors. I'm glad I became a hairstylist. What happened to you? Paul looked surprised but showed a smile. I look forward to seeing many more smiles tomorrow.
I always thought that living in Seville would be peaceful. My name is Catalina, and at 30, I enjoy my life working as an online marketing specialist from home. The house I live in was a gift from my uncle, a gesture I deeply appreciated. It's a charming place, with high ceilings and bright, airy rooms. I had no idea how quickly my sanctuary would turn into a battleground. It all started about a year ago. I was in the middle of a project, carefully crafting an ad campaign, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before going to answer. To my surprise, there stood my parents, Marta and Juan. They looked rather distressed. "Catalina, we need to talk," Marta said as she stepped inside, her voice tinged with worry. "Sure, what's going on?" I asked, trying to gauge their mood. My parents had been facing financial trouble ever since our old family home started falling apart. Renovations were far beyond their budget, and their income couldn't keep up with the rising costs. One looked around the house, and before long, he said, "This place is enormous. It seems like a waste for you to live here alone. Why don't we move in?" I was stunned. "Wait, what? You can't just decide to move in here without talking to me first. I have my own life and work to consider." Marta chimed in, "Well, your father and I don't have a place to go. We've already sold our house. This one is perfect for us." I felt my heart sink. But this house was given to me by Uncle Luis. He told me I could use it as I please. Juan's face turned red with frustration. "Luis gave you this house. You didn't even ask for it. You took advantage of the situation." "That's not true," I retorted. "I simply had a conversation with Uncle Luis, and he offered it to me. It wasn't some scheme." Despite my protests, my parents had already made up their minds. They planned to move in the very next weekend. Reluctantly, I agreed to let them stay, but only because I couldn't just leave them without a place to go. The day they moved in was chaotic. Boxes were everywhere, and my parents seemed to be in a perpetual state of discontent. They began to criticize my lifestyle immediately. "Catalina, you're already 30. Don't you think it's time to consider settling down and getting married?" Marta asked one evening as we were unpacking. "I'm happy with my work," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "I don't need a husband to validate my choices." "Look at your sister, Isabel," one said. "She's married and working for a company. You could learn something from her." I sighed. Isabel's life isn't perfect either. She's just a temp in a dead-end job. I may not have a conventional career, but I'm successful. Marta's eyes narrowed. "At least she's trying to build a family. You just sit at home and mess around on your computer." Their words cut deep, but I tried to brush them off. I knew that their generation didn't fully understand the nature of remote work, but their constant belittling was hurtful. Then, things got worse. Isabel, my younger sister, showed up unannounced one day, carrying a suitcase and looking as disheveled as ever. "Catalina, hi. I've come to stay," Isabel announced without preamble. "Wait, what's going on?" I asked, bewildered. "I'm going through a divorce and need a place to crash," she explained. "So, I'll be staying here from now on." Before I could say anything, Isabel headed upstairs and claimed one of the guest rooms. My frustration was mounting. Not only was I now sharing my home with my parents, but Isabel's unexpected arrival made things even more stressful. The tension in the house grew. Marta and Juan's constant comparison of me to Isabel was unbearable. Despite their financial struggles and Isabel's divorce, they treated me as if I were the failure of the family. To cope with the stress, I decided to adopt a pet. A friend of mine had a Persian cat named Luna that needed a new home. Luna was the sweetest little creature, and I hoped she would bring some comfort to my increasingly chaotic life. When I brought Luna home, my parents and Isabel were initially skeptical. "A cat? Really, Catalina?" Isabel asked, looking disdainful. "She's a great companion," I replied, ignoring the judgment in her voice. "Besides, she's my responsibility, not yours." The family's attitude towards Luna softened once they met her. They couldn't resist her soft fur and gentle purring, but the peace was short-lived. One afternoon, while I was busy working, Luna had a little accident on Isabel's clothes. Isabel's rage was explosive. "Catalina, how could you let your cat do this? These were my favorite clothes." I tried to explain that Luna was still adjusting to her new home and that accidents happen, but Isabel wasn't having any of it. "This is your fault. Pay for the cleaning or else." The confrontation left me shaken. I didn't know what to expect next. The tension in the house was now unbearable. As the days passed, the hostility continued to grow, and it seemed like every action I took was met with criticism. The situation at home was becoming unbearable. It felt like every day brought a new challenge, and I was struggling to keep up. Isabel's anger over Luna's accident only marked the beginning of the tension. One evening, as I was working on a new marketing campaign, Marta barged into my office. "Catalina, we need to talk," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. I looked up from my computer, weary. "What's it about this time?" "It's about Isabel's clothes," Marta began. "She's been complaining nonstop. She's asked for compensation, and I think it's only fair." I felt a surge of frustration. I've already explained that Luna is still getting used to her new environment. Accidents happen. I'm not responsible for replacing Isabel's clothes. Juan, who had been standing in the doorway, nodded in agreement. "Catalina, you should have been more careful. It's not like we can afford to keep replacing things." I tried to remain calm. I don't have the money for that. And honestly, Isabel should be more understanding. I'm already doing my best to accommodate everyone. Their criticism didn't end there. Isabel, who had overheard our conversation, stormed into the room. "You think you're so superior with your fancy job and your big house. But this is about respect, Catalina. I'm not asking for much, just a little consideration." My patience was wearing thin. Respect goes both ways, Isabel. I've put up with more than I should have already. Days passed, and the hostility in the house continued to escalate. Every small issue became a major argument. Isabel seemed determined to find fault with everything I did. Even the smallest of mistakes were magnified into huge problems. Then came the turning point that pushed everything over the edge. One night, as I was preparing dinner, I heard Isabel arguing with my parents in the living room. Their voices were raised, and the conversation was quickly turning ugly. Curious and anxious, I walked into the room. "What's going on?" Isabel's face was flushed with anger. "Catalina's cat soiled my clothes again. I've had enough," She needs to get rid of that animal. My heart sank. Isabel, it was one accident. Luna's still adjusting. Can't you be a little more patient? Juan jumped in, his voice firm. Catalina, this isn't just about the clothes. It's about the fact that you've been neglecting us. We're living here too, and you need to take responsibility. The argument grew heated, and before long, Isabel and my parents were demanding that I and Luna leave the house. We're not comfortable living here with your cat, Isabel said, her eyes blazing. Either the cat goes or you do. My shock turned to anger. So now I'm being kicked out of my own home? Because of a minor issue with Luna? Yes, Marta said sharply. It's not just about Luna. It's about how you've treated us. You've been ungrateful and inconsiderate. I was devastated. The house that had once been my sanctuary was now the source of my misery. I knew I had to make a decision. The idea of letting my family dictate my life was unacceptable. I had been pushed too far. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. I knew I had to take action. I couldn't let my family's entitlement and disrespect drive me out of my home. I needed to reclaim my independence. I decided to contact Uncle Luis. I dialed his number and waited for him to pick up. Catalina, how are you? Uncle Luis's voice was warm but tired. Hi, Uncle Luis, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need your help. I want to discuss the house. There was a pause on the other end. What's the matter? I took a deep breath and explained the situation. My parents and my sister have moved in, and things have become really difficult. They've now demanded that Luna and I leave. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry to hear that, Uncle Luis said sympathetically. If you want, I can officially transfer the title of the house to you. You can do what you need to do. The offer was a lifeline. Yes, please. I think it's time I made some changes. The next few days were a whirlwind. I worked with Uncle Luis to get the paperwork in order. The title was officially transferred to me, giving me the authority to make decisions about the property. As I signed the final documents, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The house was now officially mine, but the true test was yet to come. The confrontation with my family was far from over, and I knew it would be a challenge to stand up to their demands and hold my ground. The tension in the house was palpable. Every corner seemed to echo with unspoken resentment. Isabel's complaints had become a daily ritual, and my parents weren't any better. It felt like my home was being suffocated by their anger and demands. The day after I finalized the house transfer, I decided it was time to let my family know what was happening. I gathered them in the living room, feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve. Luna, my loyal Persian cat, sat beside me, sensing the change in atmosphere. Everyone, I need to talk to you, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I've had enough of the way things have been going. I've contacted Uncle Luis, and the house is now officially mine. Marta's face turned pale. What are you saying, Catalina? I'm saying that I've decided to sell the house, I said firmly. I can't continue living like this. I've endured enough disrespect and unfair treatment. Isabel's eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious. This is our home too. Yes, but it's my home, I countered. And I'm not going to stay here under these conditions. You've all made it clear that you don't want Luna here, and you've disrespected my space and my life choices. I can't stay in this environment anymore. Juan's face turned red with anger. You're being unreasonable. This is a drastic step. It's not drastic, it's necessary, I replied. I've tried to be understanding, but you've all pushed me too far. I'm not going to be a doormat in my own home. The room fell silent. My parents and Isabel exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. They had expected me to back down, but I was resolute. I'm giving you 2 weeks to find alternative arrangements, I said, feeling a pang of guilt but standing firm. After that, I'll put the house on the market. Marta's voice trembled. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my responsibility, I said, trying to maintain my composure. You've made it clear that you don't want me here, and now it's time for me to act on that. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the house grew even more strained. My family's panic set in as they scrambled to find a place to live. The arguments became more frequent, and their attempts to appeal to my sense of guilt grew desperate. Isabel tried to reason with me, but I remained unmoved. One evening, Isabel approached me with a look of defeat. Catalina, please. I know we've had our differences, but this is really hard for us. Can't you reconsider? I shook my head. Isabel, this isn't just about me anymore. It's about standing up for myself. You and Mom and Dad have treated me poorly for too long, and now it's time for me to reclaim my life. As the deadline approached, I made the final preparations to list the house. I contacted a real estate agent and started getting everything ready for the sale. The process was stressful, but it also brought a sense of liberation. I was finally taking control of my own future. The day before the house was set to go on the market, I held a final meeting with my family. The tension was thick as we sat in the living room, the last remnants of our shared life together. This is the final notice, I said, my voice steady. Tomorrow, the house will officially be listed for sale. I'm leaving with Luna, and you need to be out by then. Isabel and my parents looked at each other, their faces a mix of anger and resignation. They knew they had pushed me to this point, but it was clear that the reality of their situation was sinking in. I hope you understand why I had to do this, I said, feeling a wave of sadness. I wish things could have been different, but this is what needed to happen. As I packed up my things and prepared to leave, a part of me felt a pang of regret. But the overwhelming need to protect my own well-being outweighed the sadness. The house that had once been my refuge was now a symbol of conflict and hurt. The next morning, I left the house with Luna by my side. The street outside seemed brighter, and the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. I was moving on to a new chapter in my life, one where I could finally find peace and rebuild my sense of self. After leaving the house, the world felt different. The weight of family expectations and resentment was finally off my shoulders. I arrived at my new apartment in Seville, a cozy, pet-friendly place with a welcoming atmosphere. Luna seemed to sense the change too, her content purrs filling the quiet space. I spent the first few days unpacking and setting up my new home. The apartment was small but filled with light, and it quickly began to feel like a sanctuary. Luna adjusted to her new surroundings with ease, finding her favorite spots and curling up in the sunniest corners. Despite the initial relief, there was still a part of me that was troubled by the fallout of my decision. I worried about my parents and Isabel, wondering if they had managed to find a new place to live. I had cut off all contact, not out of malice, but because I needed to protect my own mental health. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk around my new neighborhood. As I strolled through the vibrant streets of Seville, I felt a sense of renewal. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the sounds of a lively city. For the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine sense of freedom. A few days later, I received a letter from my former home, delivered by a mutual friend. It was from Isabel. Her letter was filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. She wrote about the difficulties they had faced in finding a new place and the strain it had put on our family. There was a tone of regret, and she expressed her hope that we could eventually reconcile. Reading the letter, I felt a pang of empathy. Despite everything, I couldn't ignore the fact that family bonds were still there, even if strained. However, I knew that reconciliation would need to come with time and perhaps some understanding from both sides. For now, I needed to focus on rebuilding my own life and finding my own path. As weeks turned into months, I settled into my new routine. My work as an online marketing specialist continued to thrive, and Luna remained a comforting presence in my life. The apartment, once a symbol of change and challenge, became a place of peace and happiness. I found new friends in the city and began to explore Seville's rich culture and history. My life was beginning to flourish in ways I hadn't imagined. I also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in helping other pets and their owners. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that my decision to take control of my life was the right one. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my sense of self and finding a way to live authentically. The experience had taught me the importance of standing up for oneself and setting boundaries, even with those we care about. As I watched Luna play in the sun, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My life was no longer defined by the conflicts and disrespect of the past. I had emerged stronger and more self-aware, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Catalina's story, marked by conflict and resolution, highlighted the complexities of familial relationships and the importance of self-respect. The journey from strife to empowerment was not easy, but it led to a new beginning, where peace and personal growth were finally within reach.